Hi friend, in this video we're going to be making a modern house song inspired by Wh0's song, Needin U. And we're going to find out if we can do this in under 6 hours by using the 80-20 rule of house music production. What you're listening to is the song that we'll be working on. And what you're looking at right now is the Ableton project file that we'll be working on. We're going to do things in the order that I actually built them out so that you can follow along when you're creating your own music like this. So we'll be starting with the drums, moving on to the bass, then adding in like the melodic elements, synths, vocals, that kind of thing, and then stretching out the loop that we create into a fully arranged track so we can actually play it out and send it up the labels or do whatever we want to do with it. So all in all, it only took about 6 hours for me to create this, mixed, mastered, arranged, completely ready to go. And if you would like help finishing songs faster just like this, I've also made you a free bundle of templates, samples, and special bonuses that I use to completely finish a song like this, one new song like this, every single week. Visit the link that's on screen now or in the description to grab your copy of the Ultimate Song Finishing Toolkit for free. And if you want to take things to the next level and really dive into this in a lot more detail, you can also find a link to this video's project files in the description as well. With that said, let's jump into this. Alright. So when it comes to the drums for this one of the main things is right off the bat, it's really important to throw the reference track that you're working on in the project file. So we have this in here, Wh0, Sam, etc, Needin U in here, and it's turned off, and I've set it up so when I press the S key, I can flick back and forth, just like that. The next important thing is to build it up, starting with the drums. So I'm going to mute everything, but this is like a listen to the drums. I'll just stop yapping for a second so you can kind of hear it. And so let's jump into this kick. So this is a look at the kick pattern. So for the most part, it's just your classic like 4 on the floor. I have 2 samples triggering. I'll get into that in a moment. But for the main part, it's just 4 on the floor. And then there's this at the end of every 4 bars or so, there's this little like trick that happens at the end there. In terms of the actual sound, that's a little bit more interesting. So let's jump into that. I got 2 sounds playing right now. And what it is one is a kick from Rocket Powered Sound, who's sponsoring this video, so thanks to them. And then also I'm layering in the actual a kick that I stole from the actual track. So let me show you kind of how I do this. There's some interesting stuff that I've done. So one of the big things is when you look for a reference track, if you can find one of these extended mixes, they tend to have like a drum intro sound kind of like this. Just like that. And so why this is useful is what I did is I found a spot in the tune where it was just like just the kick was playing right here. Oh no, this was the hat. I'm going to come back to that in a second. Sorry. This over here, this kick over here. And so what you want to do is when looking for a kick to steal from the song, make sure there is like, there's no like low cut or anything like that happening. So if you listen to the kick here, and then if you listen to the kick here, this is the one that you want to extract. The idea is just find like a slice there, and then you can just chop it like this. I believe it's okay. Yeah. So then what I did was then you can then drop that into this rack here that I have called the R kick. And so if we play this by itself, this is what it sounds like. Oh, this is the original tune. So this is the kick on its own, just the high end. So what I've done here is I have this EQ8. So if I take this off, you can hear that is the extracted kick. And so this is useful to truck into something like this. I've made a rack for this where you can increase the filter envelope and then bring down the filter frequency. And this is going to more or less get rid of some of the extra like hi-hats and other sounds that you're hearing. It's basically a way to try to isolate it even further. Then what I did is I do have this reference kick extra little area here. So what I did was then I just froze it. And this is what it sounded like. And then what I did was I isolated a piece of the kick here. So I found a little spot of it once I've extracted it, isolated it. And then what you can do is then press show in browser and then press this little thing here. And it'll show similar sounds to this kick in your library. So you can actually use kind of like, I don't know if it's machine learning, AI, whatever, to find a bunch of different kicks that sound like similar to the actual one from the song. It's really cool. So that way you're getting like a similar sound, but you're also getting like the power and fullness of an actual sample from your one shot from your library. So we'll have to listen to that. So what I like to do here is remove this. So what I ended up finding was this kick from Rocket Powered Sound called the Territory kick. And basically I just threw a bunch of different samples into this drum rack here. And I have this selector, so you can like move it and try different sounds. But also what you can just simply do is just like in here, highlight everything and just kind of move the kicks through it. And what you want to do is just kind of flick between this and the reference to find a similar sound, just like that. Then what I did, once I found like the core sound that I wanted to use, I actually layered on top the kick that I extracted from the Wh0 tune. So that was what you were hearing at the beginning, isolated just like this. And what basically the idea here is I just went in, threw an EQ8 on here and removed everything under 200 Hertz. And I have a little bit of a duck on the high shelf here. This way I'm layering in I have the fullness of this proper kick sound. And then this stolen kick sound, I'm just using some of like the mids and highs to reintroduce some of that character that's from the original tune and just kind of like nestled that in there. That's kind of a look at that. Other than that, I have been really enjoying throwing drum bus on my kicks lately. What you can do is you can tune it to the track. So I believe the track is A minor. This is so broken for me. If anybody's experienced that, knows how to fix it. Whenever I change this, it just always changes to something else, which is frustrating, like the global tuning, so ignore that. And then basically just dialing in a bit of the boom and the decay here. So you're adding a little bit of like, this is what it sounds like by itself. Right now it's high pass. 1 second. By itself. And with the drum bus. Just fuller. It is introducing some volume too, so keep an ear out for that in any tutorial. And if anybody's talking about something and it just sounds louder because of the plugin or whatever they did, loudness is going to make your ear think that it's better. So that's important to keep in mind, but it's not introducing too much loudness, and you can kind of hear that low end really come in, which I think is really nice. Let's have to look at the kick. The next element that I added in was this clap, so let's take a look and listen to that. So essentially, in terms of the pattern, it's kind of classic snare or clap pattern. So it's on the 2 and the 4, the 2 and the 4. But there's also this little fill. And then what I did was basically just flick back and forth between the reference after. Try to like do it like that. So it's almost like in time. So you can almost imagine your clap being in the song as you're selecting your sound. So then what I did was I found like a series of sounds that I liked. And I believe I did a little bit of just a little bit of moving stuff around. So I have one that's in the center but set to this random pan by 5%. So I believe that means it's going to be moving a little bit between the left and right by 5%. So it's a little bit of cool little slight movement. Then I have one that's panned more or less hard right, and then another one that's panned to the left. And this way it's kind of creating a stereo sound, nice and full, and I feel like you can kind of hear that more or less in there. And other than that, one of the biggest things really when it comes to mixing and building out your tracks is setting up the volume. So the main thing really after that, once you have the patterns and the sound, trying to get the right volumes. So mine might be a little too loud, but I would say it's more or less close enough. Because then other than that, just running it, I usually run it into the standard channel strip, kind of a mix as you go concept here. Just removing a bunch of the lows, shelving out a bit of the highs. This way it's not interfering with the kick or bass at all. And the shelving out the highs kind of helps mix it in a little bit so it's not popping out as much. Then I'm running it into this one knob saturation, which is just Ableton Saturator. I've just mapped it to a knob here so it's not as bogged down by the visual of the device. Just dialing in saturation to taste. With saturation, what you're aiming for is watching for the volume change, because you mostly want it to be introducing like additional harmonics so that it's filling out the sound a bit more and adding a bit of kind of like grit and texture. I think is really nice. And then I'm running into this one knob width effect, which is a free polyverse wider. What I've just done is just mapped the core knobs to an Ableton rack here, so I can instantly just quickly dial it in without having to open up a VST and getting bogged down by anything. Just like dial in what I want and move on. In this instance, what I'm trying to do is move these claps a bit more into the stereo field, pushing them left and right, so it has that nice wide stereo effect, but also leave stuff in the center, which we'll get into. It leaves room in the center for the other elements that are more important to be in the center, like vocals and kick and all that. That's a look at that. What I am also dialing in here is a little bit of reverb. I have my reverb on my send here, and what I am doing, I believe, is it's more or less in time. But what I've done is like use like the reverb calculator, delay time calculator, to be able to dial in the decay. So it's like, I think it's pumping at a quarter note, I want to say, which just allows you to dial in a bit more reverb so that it's filling up the sound, but then it's fading away in time for the next hit, so it doesn't sound all cluttered and messy and crappy, basically. That's it. Let's move on to the next element that I added in, which was the snare. So let's take a look and listen. So essentially what we got going on here is, it's more or less, this pattern is where I started. So it looks a little complicated, but let's just focus on this first. Main thing is to add it in so that it's on the 2 and the 4 and the 2 and the 4, just like before. And I think I want to have you focus on just like the first 2 bars, because usually what I do is I'll work on like the first 2 bars like this, get like the main hits in, do this by flicking back and forth to kind of hear what's going on. And then the idea is to, once you have the core hits in, to add these little extra like flam bits and that kind of stuff. And this adds a little bit of character and a little bit of like extra vibe to your drums. And it's what I kind of hear in the track. They're like that little flam snare sound. Kind of that sound that happens. So that's kind of like that quick notes right before the snare hit, like here and here. And then once I built it up between 2, I press the duplicate button, I think, yeah, right here. If you can follow my mouse. So that way I have this second bit here, and it's just like a opportunity to do like a slight change. That way the difference between what's happening in the first 2 bars is a little different between what's happening in the 3rd and 4th. And then this whole section, this whole phrase is slightly different than the following 4 bars. This way there's some movement and some change and like a little bit of something different to listen to throughout the track. And it's all about the subtlety, especially with like house music like this, because it's very loop based, not a lot of changes. It's not like verse, chorus. So you need to do these small little things to make things interesting and evolving over time, even when like the listener doesn't even know it's particularly what it is, which is one of the things I really love about it. That's it. Main thing after that was trying to just go through the sounds, provide a bunch of different snares that somewhat fit the bill. And what you want to listen to here is kind of the center. The claps are like left and right in this track, and the center is like down the middle. So how about listen to the center? It's like a bit lower sounding claps, usually a bit higher sounding, I would say. And the more you work on this, the more you'll kind of like develop the ear between the snare and the clap, because they're usually meant to blend together when they're being mixed in. But that's kind of a look at that. Other than that, what is going on is the standard channel strip. We're just moving a bit of the lows, getting rid of a tiny bit of the highs, a bit of saturation here, a bit of width. And I think what I might even be doing here is, if we go back here, it's pretty similar settings in terms of like the channel strip. So a bit of saturation, a bit of width. We look at the clap, similar amounts of width and saturation. So it's somewhat making it blend in together. The next element that I added was the open hi-hat. Let's have a look and listen to that. So if we have a listen to the reference, there's like a lot of hats going on, I'd say. It just sounds so full and like awesome. So that's what I was trying to recreate. Spoiler, I didn't do it just on this track. I had to come back to it and add an additional track, so we'll get to that in a moment. But basically what I did was just found a bunch of different hat sounds and kind of layered them together to try to get something going on here. If you have a look at the velocities, the idea is one hits louder and the next one's a bit softer, so there's a little bit of a humanization feel going on there. And then also what's important is when you're layering hats like this, make sure you're really listening to like phasing, because sometimes hats from the same like pack are technically the same hat with like a little bit of slightly different processing, which means it's essentially the same sample. And when you have the same sample playing together, you can potentially get some weird like phasing issues. That like almost like unwanted chorus effects might come up basically. If you want to listen to that. So I ended up with this 3 open hats. We're gonna add another one in a moment too. That's what I ended up with. And then in terms of processing, standard channel strip, we're removing some of the lows, shelving up some of the highs. Shelving is a nice way to remove some of the highs in a way that is going to maybe be less intense than the classic like low pass filter, which can sound a little bit unnatural. I want to just give a little tip on that. And then we're actually running into this transient shaper, which I haven't gone over yet in this video. So this is a free kilohertz transient shaper. And what we're doing here is, again, just mapped the knobs, so I don't have to open that plugin up and I can just quickly make the moves. The idea is here is I brought up the attack a little bit so that transient's hitting a little bit harder, and then I brought down the sustain a little bit so it's making it sound a little bit tighter. Definitely, I think a big thing with drums is trying to control the transients. Usually I like to err on the side of like tighter sounding drums. That's maybe more of my choice, but something to definitely consider. Then we're running into this strip here where we're just bringing in some saturation, so we're trying to fill out that sound a lot more because it's such a full sounding open hat. Like, definitely it seems like there's layers and just sounds so full and awesome. So trying to get that, couldn't fully get it. So then full disclosure, I added this open hat layer that we're about to add in next. I added this in after I added in all this. But I want to like show you it. So basically, no, I'm conflicted. I'm going to move it to the end. We're going to come back to this. I want to show you in the order that I did it so that you kind of see what the process is like. But spoiler, we're going to come back to an additional open hat sound. So when I was creating it in the first time, what I added in next was this close hats. Have a look at the MIDI too. And then listen to the reference. This can be tough. What you're listening for is the hats and you're trying to ignore the shaker sound. There's also shaker sounds that we're going to be adding in. Shaker sound, I feel like it's hard to write. But basically it's a pretty skippy sounding open hi-hat sound. Main thing is I first added this in, which is more or less hitting at the same kind of like hits as the open hat, so it's reinforcing it. And then there's this little like I don't know how bad that was, but like we can hear it more than anything. And if we just like, yeah, something like that basically going on. So just listen back and forth, trying to really focus on the hats, just like that. And then same idea, worked on the first bar like this, and then made a slight change to the second bar so there's some kind of movement in terms of any, and then basically just tried to flick back and forth to find similar sounds as I was creating it. So again, same stuff usually applies. Flicking back and forth to your reference so that you can first get the right note placements, then make sure you select the right sounds, and then dial in the volumes. That's the main thing. Then other than that, some slight mix as you go stuff is optional. So we're just removing a bit of the lows, so it's not really doing too much. It's just there's something here, I guess. And I usually just have it so it's always my EQ8. This channel strip goes on every single one of my audio and MIDI tracks. And the idea is it's always by default removing everything under 200 hertz. Usually everything other than like the kick and the bass is what I want taking up that area. So just having it so it's automatically doing that. I don't have to do it every time. And then I can just quickly adjust it. Nothing much else going on there. So we'll just bust through because there's just a few other things. Next thing I added in was the shaker. So just a cool little shaker, removing a whole ton of the lows here, but I don't think it's doing too much. Removing some of the attack so that it's kind of blending in a bit more and letting like the transients of the other like cymbals, hi-hats, open hats take care of that. A little bit of sidechain, so it's again removing some of that initial sidechain and creating some kind of like pumping. The way I do sidechain is with a taper device going to quarter notes, which is what the kick's usually playing, and it's just ducking volume, so you don't have to do any weird compressor routing and all that kind of crap. So just dial that in, and a little bit of width to push it to the left and right and make it stereo. Next thing I added in was this. Which isn't too much in the main track, I would say. But one thing that I like to do is add in additional like top loops or breaks. And that way, it's a nice way to blend in a bit of extra character to your drum sound and make it sound a bit more professional and complex. But the idea is to blend it into your core sounds being like the kicks, snares, open hi-hats, and that kind of stuff that you've punched in with one-shots, to add a bit of extra character and depth. So what we have is this. One thing I usually like to do is beats on transients, and then the arrow pointing to the right, you can dial back the transients, and tidying up these top loops is a really good way to help it blend in with the rest of your core drums. So we're just running into the standard channel strip here. We're moving some of the lows up a little bit higher in frequencies, trying to make sure that this kick in the low end here is not interrupting like our main kick or anything like that. A little bit of one knob side chain, so it's pumping a bit and making room for the kick even more. A little bit of the one knob with plug-in to push it to left and right, make it a bit more stereo. And then the next one I added in was this. Solo it for a second. Let's see if I did any transient stuff here. So similar stuff, pulled back the transient to tighten up the sound a bit. Moving a bit of the lows, a bit of one knob side chain. There you go. Next thing I added was the shaker. Let's listen to the reference for a sec. Not sure if this is fully in there as much, but I wanted to add a bit more of a shaker element, which I was hearing quite a bit in the tune. So I threw that in there. What this is a bunch of different shakers, 2 different shakers. Don't get too confused by this. This is nothing going on there. I just found 2 different shakers. I think I might be, one is pan left, one is pan right. So it's kind of going for like a bit of stereo sound. Standard channel strip stuff, removing some of the lows. Removing some of the sustain to tighten up the sound a bit more. One knob side chain, making room for the kick, and making a little bit of that cool pumping sound. Saturation, make it a little bit fuller, and width to again, make it a little bit more stereo. And the last thing I want to go over is I did add a bunch of different like ride loops. This is more like almost an arrangement thing, so I'll show you really quick what that looks and sounds like. So I got a bunch of different rides. I have this one from, I don't know where this is, panned a bit to the right, then I found another one, panned a lot more to the left, and then this other one, kind of in the center, and it's like, this is a reference, you can hear the ride that gets added. I think I actually might be playing more notes, but that's what that sounds like. And the last thing I want to go over here is the additional open hi-hat. So as I was working through it, listening back and forth like this, something about my open hi-hat just wasn't doing the trick. So I ended up going back and adding an additional layer, and that's what this looks and sounds like. I'm gonna solo it. It's like lower sounding and like kind of fuller. Not sure if it's fully nailing it, but I think it gets it closer there. And the way that I found this was also a pretty cool little trick that I kind of teased at the beginning. I found a spot in the beginning of the drum loop where just that hat is playing, and then I grabbed it, and then I went show in browser, and then I went found similar sounds. So I basically extracted just like that open hi-hat that I'm trying to recreate. Couldn't figure out how to do it, so I just used the power of machine learning to find similar sounds, picked one that I like, dropped it in there, and away we go. Other than that, main thing is dialing in the volume, because we're just doing a little bit of the same channel strip stuff here. Lows, highs, saturation, width, boom. And so yeah, that's a pretty good look at that. Alright. So when it comes to the bass for this one, a couple of things I want to mention right off the bat. Really important is to have a reference track in your project file. So what we have is the David Morales, Wh0, etc track Needin U in our project file here, and what I've done is I've turned off the track and I've set it up so that when I press the S key, I can flick between that track and our track. So what you can focus on is selecting the right notes, then selecting the right sounds, and then settling the right volumes. And that's really kind of the main thing. Having similar sound and getting it so that your volumes are similar is like is the badass shortcut that you really want to take away from this. So with that said, let's have a look at maybe a look and a listen to the bass by itself. And so what I basically heard is just like I was flicking back and forth between the reference like this after making the drums. I usually make the drums first. Sounds pretty similar, I would say. Just kind of did it by ear. I found out that the song was in A minor from just checking it out on Beatport, I think, it said on there. And then just kind of listened to it by flicking back and forth and end up with this kind of like rolling bass line. Main thing, I'm not really a music theory master, so I can't tell you too much of what's going on here. I was mostly just doing it by ear, but I did make some small, like, instead of having the notes just fully play over this, there was a little bit of, I was trying to pull back some of the notes so that there's a little bit of like articulation. In my music at least, when I'm building up bass lines, I've been noticing that mine sound a little too flubby and, I don't know, almost inarticulate, like you can't hear all the individual notes. So this was an attempt by me to try to make it sound like so you could hear the articulate notes a little bit more. With that said, once I had the notes down correct, what the next thing I did was worked on the sound design. So when it comes to sound design, what I usually like to do is have 2 layers with the bass. So right now what you're listening to is a sub layer with a mid bass layer. So what I'm gonna do first is remove the mid bass layer. And so just listen to the sub for a bit. Soloed. And so there's a couple reasons I like to do this. One is when you're working with a sub, first, it's a really simple sound. It's just a sine wave. It's just very, very fundamental bass sound. And so this is very similar to when you're building out, people might build out their melodies on like a acoustic guitar or like a piano, because it's a very neutral sound and you can focus on the notes more than like anything else and not get bogged down by the sound design or anything like that. So that's one great thing about it when, composing and writing stuff. The second reason is by having 2 different layers like this, you can make sure that your sub layer is just taking care of the low end of the track. And that way, when you're working on the mid bass layer after, you can do whatever kind of sound design you want to that to make it sound, good and in service of the bass sound that you want and in service of the song that you want, without it worrying about like, oh no, if I make this change, it might mess up the low end, because you have it separate. So I think that's really important. That's something I really like to do. With that out of the way, my sub sound here is just something I made called the V sub 2. You can grab this in the project files if you would like, but it's just an operator, and then it's basically just some sine wave that's playing, and with some options to add in different levels and different styles of saturation. So there's shaper drive, filter drive, and harmonic drive, and then a saturator at the end as well. So basically, when I could hear this, it's mostly a sub sound, but it's a sub sound with some like grit and some character. And so I dialed in a bit more drive than normal that I usually do, so it's a bit more, saturated sounding. And then what we have is a little bit of one knob sidechain here. So I've also just created a sidechain in here. We'll go over a bit in the mid bass layer, but I've mapped it as a one knob sidechain, so it's just in there, and that way I can just dial it in and move on without having to make any changes. So all within one device. Can add some extra saturation for grit and texture, and also for helping the sub come through on laptop speakers and stuff. And then dial in things like sidechain, and then as well as bring down some of the high end. So I have a auto filter here, and just removing a bunch of the highs, so it's mostly just the lows that's sticking up the sound. Next element that I added in was this mid bass layer, so let's take a look and listen to it. And let's hear that mid bass layer on its own. So I really like using bass guitar sounds. For me, it's like a kind of signature sound that I like to go for. It might kind of be in the original tune. I'm not 100% sure. It could just be like a saturated sub bass. But this is what it looks and sounds like. In terms of the MIDI notes, you'll probably notice that there's no MIDI notes here. What I like to do when working with 2 tracks like this is instead of having this mid bass layer set to all ends, I have it set to subs, and this way, when it's all ends, it's going to look at what's on the track and looking for the MIDI notes here. You can change it to a different MIDI device, and now these notes are being automatically routed into our bass guitar notes. So if we make any changes to this throughout the song as we're developing it, we don't have to do a crazy amount of copy and paste annoying crap. So that's pretty important. When utilizing this technique, I'd also recommend tossing on a pitch device. So if we have a listen to the bass guitar by itself, this is what it sounded like without the pitch device at the natural pitch of the sub. You can hear that. Kind of sounds cool, but it's also definitely clearly too low, I would say. So by having a pitch device on, you can just move it up or down multiple octaves. So that way, if the natural, notes octave of the sub is not what's perfect for the mid bass layer, you don't have to copy it over and shift it up an octave. You can just use this device to make it super simple like that. Then what I'm running into after that is this Trillion Chapman device, which is just I sampled out a VST that I like to use, but I don't like loading up the VST all the time. You can grab this as well if you'd like. It's just a sick bass guitar sound that I've always liked. We're running in a little bit of extra drive with the SMP circuit, and I've dialed back the sustain a bit to try to make this sound a little bit tighter in an effort to have it blend in more with the sub and make it sound like a cohesive unit. Then other than that, Big thing when you're working with a mid-bass layer is you're going to want to remove a bunch of lows. So I'm getting rid of everything under 200 hertz. And then I'm using a high shelf filter to remove and tame a bunch of the highs. Not using a low pass filter here, which can sound good most of the time, but also sometimes it can sound a little bit unnatural. And this could be a way to lower some of the highs in a way that sounds a little natural and you're still preserving some of that high end. Which I wanted a bit of that with like that bass guitar sound. It is subtly blended in, but I think it sounds cool. Then other than that, we're running into this one knob width plugin. What this is a free plugin from Polyverse called Wh0. I would definitely check it out. And I've just mapped the core knobs to an Ableton device so I can just quickly make the moves without having to open up the VST. And this is just pushing that mid-bass layer to the left and right, making it a bit more stereo in a nice way. So that the sub's nice in the middle, holding down all the low end, and then like the mid-bass is taking care of the character and adding a bit more stereo sound without like weird stereo sub sounds. And then running into this same one knob sidechain that I had in that B sub. Which, let's take a look at it. It's just an Ableton shaper device set to quarter notes, and then it's just rocking, bringing down the volume. So this is a way to just have a one knob sidechain, so you don't have to like do all this routing with compressors and stuff like that, which I find annoying. And then you could just dial it in, move on, and away you go. Then we're just running a little bit of saturation, which we're using to fill up the sound a bit more, add a bit of grit and texture to that sound. And that's pretty much a good look at this one. I think if we have a look, the only thing is, we'll get into the arrangement video, but when like the tune breaks into this part, I just changed the bass sounds a little bit. It's just holding notes basically. But that's basically about it. I think that's a pretty good look at the bass for this one. Alright. So when it comes to the melodic elements like the synths, vocals, samples, all that kind of stuff for this tune, the main driver is going to be the piano that we're going to be building out and the vocal. So one of the first things that I'd recommend when doing any of this is making sure that you have the reference track that you want to be building your song against in your DAW and setting it up so that it's turned off, and when you press like a key on the keyboard, for example when I press S, it solos that track so we can switch back and forth. And this way, what we can do is make sure we're selecting the right like samples and sounds, and one of the biggest things that we'll get into in a moment is the volumes. So with that said, let's go in order of how I built things out. The first thing is when I was listening to it, I could hear that vocal, and so that's what I wanted to start building up first. So this is the first element that I added. We'll take a look and a listen to this. What I was going for was that kind of that little U kind of thing. This one's a little pitched up, a little way to make it sound a little bit different from the original. Just found something on Splice and chopped it up and then kind of put it into the similar positions there. In terms of the processing going on, I threw this Shaper Box plugin and found this YDK. I don't really know too much what it's doing. Let me turn it off for a second. Just kind of more center. It's kind of like warbling it around, panning it, kind of making it sound more interesting, I would say, in terms of like kind of some stereo movement imaging going on. Then what I'm running into is the standard channel strip. The first thing is removing a bunch of the lows so it's not competing with like the kick or the drum or anything like that. And in this instance, I did bring up a bunch of the highs. Felt like it needed that compared to the reference. Probably does it. Probably bringing it down just a little bit. And then what I'm running into is some sidechain. So I set it up like this. So it's a one knob sidechain using Ableton Shaper, just going to quarter notes, which is what the kick's usually doing, just ducking down the volume. This way, it's just a one knob sidechain that we don't have to play around with compressors or anything like that and routing. You can just bring it into taste, and there you go. So what this is doing is leaving room for the kick in any instance where it is overlapping with the kick, and then kind of adding that cool pumping sound that's pretty characteristic in dance music. Then we're bringing up some of this Ableton Saturation, which is just the Ableton Saturator device. I've just again mapped to this knob. Don't have to play around with like the UI or anything like that. And what this is doing is just filling out the sound a little bit, adding a little bit of grit with the saturation. And I think that's pretty, whoops. Whoops. And then the other thing there is I'm using some sends and returns. So right here is where my mouse is a little bit of reverb, a short delay, and a long delay. So I'll quickly show you what that looks like. I'm using the Valhalla vintage verb here, and I brought down the decay, so I believe that it's pumping on quarter notes or maybe half notes. The idea is to use like a calculator, like a delay time calculator, so that you can have this in time with your music. Makes it so you can dial in a bit more reverb without it being as like muddy and messy and interfering. This is a look at the short reverb using its eighth notes with a little bit of the movement here, pushing it off the grid, and then lastly running it into this longer delay, which is at quarter notes, and a little bit of movement pushing it up and then down off the grid a little bit. So just dialing that in a bit to taste to kind of give that cool spacey sound, fills it out quite a bit more too, and then the idea is by using the same sends and returns, all these elements are going to be going through the same reverb and delay, which is going to kind of help it make it feel like it's all in the same space. That's it. Let's move on to the next element. And then flicking back to the reference, just trying to pay attention just to the vocal like little chop bits. Main thing is really the volumes is what you want to pay attention to there, because really everything else is just very slight touches when it comes to the processing. So let's have a look at this lower U here. Running into this effect track with this like pan man effect. So again, just trying to make this move around the panorama a little bit, the stereo field, so it's sounding more interesting and kind of a fun way to make things just basically sound more interesting. And we're removing much of the lows, shoving out a little bit of the highs, a little bit of the one knob side chain, a little bit of saturation to fill out the sound a bit. Then I was running into a K clip just to bring up the volume a little bit, and then a little bit of this one knob width plugin. What this is Polyverse Wider, which is a free plugin, which is really awesome. It's really good at like making things sound wider. But the main thing is I just mapped some of the main knobs to this Ableton rack, so it's just a lot easier to use, and I don't have to open up the plugin each time, just right there ready to go. And so what this is doing is helping push this sound a bit more to the left and the right, making it a bit more stereo and leaving space in the middle for the other elements. And then I dialed in a little bit of reverb and delay as well with the returns. Then the next element that I added in was this louder bit here. Let me play it from over here too. This one right here. There's almost more like the full vocal that's playing, a little bit more, before it gets into the chops. Similar processing, used K-clip just to bring up some volume on this one, a little bit of effect track, probably doing some panning, or I don't know, just I guess, okay, so there's a bunch of cool things going on here. It's adding a little bit of the crystallizer effect, which is one of my favorite things. It adds that like kind of crystally granular kind of echoes. And then I just found this like interesting preset. Just wanted to kind of make it sound a little bit more different and interesting, I guess. And then Space Echo is off. It's more of an arrangement trick, so I'll get to that in the arrangement portion. And then running into just like standard channel strip stuff, so we're removing some of the lows, a little bit of side chain so it's pumping, making room for the kick, and then a little bit of wider to push things to left and right, and then a little bit of reverb delay over here. And the next thing that I noticed that's in the track, kind of moving away from the overall vocals, is this kind of like swell sound. So if you listen to the back, that vocal that's building, that kind of thing. For that, what I did is I just found this little bit here. So definitely in their tune, they're kind of like throwing the vocal through like some kind of delay or something, like, and then exporting it out, duplicating it over something. They're using the actual vocal that they use in the track to create this sound, but I just found something that was similar and just chucked it in there. Kind of gets a similar effect. It's a little different, super simply. And then super like processing's pretty simple. Removing some of the lows, a little bit of sidechain so it's pumping. That's basically about it. So that's a look at the vocals. What I decided, I wanted to go through the vocals first because it felt like this kind of like really carrying the track. And I'm finding getting the vocals in sooner in your track is better than later, because or else it can be a really difficult process going through like all these different vocal bits, trying to find something that fits perfectly with what you've already arranged. It can be a lot nicer to have the vocal in earlier and then just build everything else around it, because it's such a fundamental core part, like a hook like that. That's why I went about getting these kind of vocal bits in first, and then I added in the piano bit. So let's have a listen to the first layer. And let's listen to the reference. Right? So mine sounds a little clearer, and the one in the reference sounds a little bit more almost like lo-fi, which is what I'm going to bring in on the second layer here. So first thing was, I just found this piano loop, and then cut it up so that it could do like those stab sounds. But it's important in this style, I would say, to find a piano sample that you can use the full drag out of that, because then it's going to come important in like the break, which I'll show you in a moment. But first we wanted to get kind of that chop. So found a cool sample in Splice, and found something that had like if you can hear this, like a progression, right? Because that's going to come really important. Other than that was just flicking back and forth between the reference, trying to get like the positions of it right, and then trying to get the volumes right. In terms of any processing, what we have going on here is just removing some of the lows, so it's not interfering with the kick or the bass at all, and then removing some of the highs to kind of try to nestle it in a little bit, then a little bit of this one knob sidechain, make it pump, remove it from the kick and all that again, saturation to fill out the sound a bit, and to make it so that it a little bit like kind of gritty and texture is kind of nice from the saturation as well. And then an auto filter, which is more of an effect. It's like when it's swelling in slowly, basically. Then I pan this one to the left by 26. If you listen, I feel like you can hear that piano. There's a little bit more on the left side. And then I added in, duplicated over that element. And also, the thing with the arrangement is like this cool little thing at the end. There's a little kind of like build up there or something. So then what I did is I duplicated it over and added this additional element. So let's take a look and listen. Let's solo it out. So they kind of work together in a way to kind of get a little bit closer to that like lo-fi sound of it. Just like a different way to approach it. And I pan this one to the right, and then that way it's kind of filling it out the piano sound, making it so you can hear it on both ends a little bit, but it's mixing quite a bit lower. In terms of what's going on here, in terms of the processing for this other one, you can hear it's like pretty weird and like messed up. So what I have is this like this roared preset, which is doing quite a bit. Drums, I don't know, spectral probably or something. And then we're moving a bunch of the lows, similar EQ moves as the other one. But then I'm also running into this Brooklyn resonator, and that's kind of adding that like ringing sound. Hear it? Right there. And then what I've also done is I've mapped up this LFO to the dry wet, so that it's slowly adding in that kind of ringing sound over time. It's like a subtle small thing, but it adds like some interesting character, I would say. Then for this one, we're using the transient shaper to increase the attack and bring down the sustain a little bit. What this is the free kilohertz transient shaper device, just mapped again like the core features. This way it's kind of making it cut out a little bit more, and it's making it tighter sounding by removing some of the sustain, then some sidechain and some drive and saturation there. And that's a good look at that. Then in this area on the back half of the tune, if you listen, there's like that piano, right? I don't know if you can hear, but there's almost like a little like rave element, so I added in this. Let me bring up the volume. So what I did was just looked up some rave stabs on Splice, and then cut it up and made it so it's more or less kind of being a little bit like call and response a little bit. It's like mostly following that the piano hits, but some of them are a little extra basically, and then off I guess off the piano hit. So it's a little call and response, like echo kind of sounding vibe there. In terms of the processing, just removing some lows, a little bit of the sidechain and saturation. I pen this one to the right, so that way it's kind of bouncing off the main piano. You can mostly hear on the left side. Then I think last thing I want to show you is this in the structure. It's important to have, like I mentioned, how you have like the cut up piano, but you want to also have, in this style at least, you want to have it so you can do something like this. So let's have a listen. The piano's slowly filtering in. And then I added this extra vocal. And that's the kind of, in this one, the verse of the tune comes in here, just like disco-y song. And I just went about it a little different way, just creating a different vocal bit to play in just for this part. Yeah, I think that's a pretty good look at the synth and vocals on this one. Main thing is that it really is this, like, these vocal chops is kind of the main thing. Ideally, if you were recreating it like in a really good way, you'd be using vocal chops like this that you can cut up, and then use whatever song you're chopping this up from to like be in like the breakdown part to like play as almost a verse, so you don't have to like find something separate. And then the main thing again, it's like really a lot about like reusing elements in that way. So like finding a cool chord progression so that you can use it in the break, and then also have it so that you're chopping it up in the main drop. That way there's like a through line of the same sounds being used throughout the whole song, but they're just being chopped up and arranged in different ways, basically. Which is a cool way to make it so everything sounds, you know, cohesive, but also has changing elements throughout the track, which we'll get into a little bit more in the structure video. Yeah, I think that's a good look at this one. What we'll do next is do a rundown of the 80-20 rule when it comes to synths and vocals in house music production, so you can apply what you've been learning here to your actual own productions. Before we do that, I just want to quickly mention that this video is sponsored by our good friends over at Rocket Powered Sound. They actually hooked up the kick drum that we're hearing in this track, which is a pretty, I mean, having solid drum sounds is pretty important. So that's why I'm really excited that they hooked up they're sponsoring the video here. And also, if you would like, you can get 30% off of their Ultimate Sample Pack, which is a sample pack that includes over 1,000 really iconic and usable sounds. And the kick drum that we're listening to and that I used in this video is from that sample pack. Just visit the link that's on screen now or in the description, and make sure you use the code ULTIMATEBESTFRIENDS to get 30% off of that. And also, if you grab the project files for this one, you'll be able to get any of the Rocket Power Sounds drums that they hooked up for the project files as well. So yeah, really grateful for them for hooking up our community like this. And with that said, let's jump into the 80-20 rule for this one. Hi, my friend, Matt from Best Friends Club here. And if you've been paying attention to this super long video, then you've probably figured out what the 80-20 rule is when it comes to building out your songs. The goal here is to get 80% of the result with only 20% of the time, energy, and effort. And because the first key to the 80-20 rule here is to use a reference track, we're making sure that we're very easily hitting 80% of a high quality, professionally made song. In particular, we use that reference track to make sure that we're picking the right notes, sounds, and volumes as we're building out our song. The second key of the 80-20 rule here is to mix as you go in an extremely streamlined way by only focusing on the volume of each track, as well as using a simple repeatable channel strip for each track that we're adding to our songs. The third and final key is to repurpose your old project files and have a suite of powerful templates, Ableton racks, and one-knob effects that you've personalized and curated over time. If you'd like to get a head start by downloading all the racks, templates, and all the files that you've seen me use in the Ableton project file for this video, or if you'd just like to take a closer look at any of the techniques or tracks you saw me work on in this video at your own pace, you can find a link to this video's project files on screen now and at the second link that's in the YouTube description. I'm recreating a different song from the Beatport top charts every single week, and making the project files available to anyone who wants them. You'll also get access to a private Discord where you can ask me and the community questions, as well as share tracks for feedback. If you or your music are not quite ready for a shot in the arm like that, I've also made you a completely free bundle of templates, samples, and special bonuses that have helped me figure out how to completely finish one new song each and every single week. And you can grab that free Ultimate Song Finishing Toolkit by visiting the first link that's in the YouTube description here. However, if you just feel like staying on YouTube for now, that's totally fine. Save that link for later, and check out this playlist filled with videos just like the one you just watched, where I completely create songs inspired by tracks found in the Beatport top charts. Or if you really want to take what you've learned in this video to the next level, make sure you check out this video right here.